If you've looked into the gaming challenge scene of YouTube before, it's very likely you've seen videos titled something like, "Can you beat this game without using weapons?" I have done this multiple times. But strategy games like Fire Emblem don't really give you an option to not use weapons besides being unable to deal damage. But in Fire Emblem Three Houses, there is an ability titled Unarmed Combat, which reads, "User is able to fight without having a weapon equipped." This skill allows us to still be able to fight with an empty inventory by allowing us to use our two hands. The pros of using Unarmed Combat is that we always attack twice if we initiate an attack, and we don't have to worry about durability. But the cons are that we have a 70% chance of hitting our attacks, we have 0 might, which is a stat that boosts damage output, and only male units can use this skill. Anyways, this skill gave me a question that I really wanted to answer myself. Can you beat Fire Emblem Three Houses without using any weapons? First off, I know Shark3143 already tried out this challenge 2 years ago, but he has different rules than I do, and I'm pretty sure the second half of the game has been abandoned. But if you do want to see that video, look at the top right of the screen, there should be a card there, and it's also going to be down in the description. So speaking of rules, what are my rules? 1. We are only allowed to deal damage with our fists. Any other form of damage besides NPC attacks are not allowed. 2. New Game Plus is not banned. In order to get Unarmed Combat before level 10, we will need to have previous game data available. But since I'm allowing that, I'm also allowing myself to use previous battalions for stat boosts, and I'm also allowing myself to max out my professor level since fishing for hours is really boring. 3. No DLC. I just don't have it, so I'm not using it. I'm also not allowing the infinite month glitch, for obvious reasons. With that being said, we can now pick our difficulty, which is going to be the most difficult one, Maddening. I'm also picking casual mode, since I am not a Fire Emblem expert by any means. Now we can choose whether we want to play as female Byleth or male Byleth. As I said earlier, Unarmed Combat is a gender-locked skill, but since we have New Game Plus on, we aren't so limited. So we can choose female Byleth to get the best of both worlds by having a male-only skill on a female-only class. After making our character, we head into battle soon after, and since we aren't able to use New Game Plus features until we reach the Monastery, we're stuck with useless weapons we aren't going to want to use. Thankfully, we don't need to use any weapons. We have Gerald as a green unit who can attack for us. He is unable to move during this chapter though, so we'll need to unequip our weapons and lure enemies so he can attack for us. This worked pretty well, and we even got the boss Costas lured in, but for some reason, Gerald couldn't beat the boss. He was always left at 1 HP. Why this happens? I don't know, it makes no sense. But of course, this does mean we have to deal damage to Costas without using our fists because we can't defend ourselves yet, I guess. I think the most fair way of doing this would be to use Claude to finish the job, since we won't be getting any XP with him. You can definitely beat this chapter if Unarmed Combat was available. I checked the stats to make sure, but I'm not going to go through the trouble of modding this game just to get Unarmed Combat in this chapter. After completing the prologue, we can view a cutscene where Costas jumps up and tries to kill Edelgard, but she takes out a dagger to defend herself, which we don't want. So Byleth gets in the way to block the attack, and we're not going to worry about the rest of the cutscene because a sword is definitely not used. Now we can finally arrive at the Garreg Mach Monastery, where we are tasked with talking to all 3 house leaders and picking the class we want to teach. We have our choices set as Edelgard, who can't use Unarmed Combat, Dimitri, who can have a deadly skill combination, and Claude, who I haven't actually had a chance to use. I guess we're going with Dimitri then. After picking our class, we get to explore our room, and that lets us look into our journal and equip Unarmed Combat, then close the journal for the rest of the game. Now we can start doing some quests for this month, with the first being to plant some seeds in the greenhouse. This will be an important part of our free time in each month, since it takes no time to do, and we can get stat boosters that bring up a single point of our stats permanently. By the way, I'm not going to be very in-depth with my free time explorations, since I am basically going to be doing the same thing every week. I'll most likely only mention when I'm trying to recruit someone. Anyways, after going through our very first exploration, we can start our first mission titled Rivalry of the Houses. And this is a mock battle with the 2 other houses. And since we're in Maddening, all of my team is level 1, while the other teams are at level 7. In addition to this, only Byleth is able to attack, but that doesn't necessarily mean our other units aren't going to be useful. Mercedes can heal and also gain XP, Annette can use Rally to give us +4 strength for attacking, and everyone on the team can use E-rank battalions that I am allowed to use from New Game Plus. Some of these battalions I will use to give our units more movement or healing, but I also might use battalions to boost my stats, since you do get bonus stats for most battalions. So I gave Byleth the Almyra Mercenaries, which gives +5 attack. Dimitri got Retribution, since he's the only unit who starts off with D-rank authority, and this will help with ranged units because Retribution allows counterattacks regardless of distance for 5 turns, which I will be calling Bluetooth Fists for the remainder of the game. I also gave Stride to Mercedes, since it'll give Byleth +5 movement for 1 turn so she can go closer to the battle straight away. Anyways, I pretty much just explained the first turn, and on enemy phase, Lorenz and Ignatz attacked Byleth, but took more damage than they dealt, since we have a much better avoid rate while hiding in this bush. On the next turn, Mercedes used Stride again, so Annette could help Byleth take down Lorenz. After that, I took a bit of a risk and took down Dorothea, and Ignatz followed the next turn. Annette almost lost all her HP from that fight, but thankfully she still pulled through. For the next turns, I decided to heal up my team and head toward Claude and Hilda, who I wanted to lure out since they spawn in a forest tile that gives 40 avoid. I put Byleth in the danger zone to aggro both of them, and took out Hilda easily thanks to Annette's strength buffs. I wasn't able to take out Claude in 1 turn though, and he was really looking to defeat Annette, but he took a vulnerary instead of attacking, so we took him out easily. Defeating Professor Hanneman was also pretty easy since he moved off his heal tile, and after that the rest of the Black Eagle house went after us, but the only unit that was troubling us was Annette, who was on our team, and that's because for some reason she auto-equipped wind magic. This could have happened for a few reasons. I could have attacked a wall, I could have traded an item with her, or I could have just forgotten to unequip her weapon. But either way, this would have ended our run. So I played through the chapter again and got past Edelgard and friends to level up Byleth 5 times before moving on to chapter 2 in 31 turns. With Byleth being over level 5, she can also start taking certification exams to get into different classes. I put her into the Myrmidon class first so she could eventually get the Speed +2 ability and the Swap Combat Art. Something I want to do during this playthrough is give all my units combat arts that will give more movement options, and eventually when we get a B rank in Brawling, we'll be able to heal half our total health for free. Anyways, we did some gardening, ate food to raise student motivation, and started instructing so we could eventually get more attackers once they reached level 10. I specifically wanted to raise Annette's authority and sword ranks so she could eventually become an assassin and become a rally bot who wouldn't be able to get attacked. This would work because her authority abilities give her multiple rally moves, and the assassin class gives her stealth, which won't allow enemies to attack her as long as there is another unit nearby. I also gave almost everyone Golden Faith so they can start healing, which gives a set amount of XP and isn't an attack. On the second week of this month, we are forced to do an auxiliary battle, which is pretty much a practice battle so you can get rewards easily. But we're going to be using these practice battles a bit differently. In this practice battle, I put Dedu as an adjutant for Mercedes, and while he will be unable to attack, he will gain half the amount of experience Mercedes obtains, and since healing magic has a set amount of XP that will be given, we can sort of create a way to gain experience for our units without having them attack. Anyways, the third week of this month forced us to do a seminar so we can just move on to chapter 2's mission, where I did have to make some preparations in the form of giving all my units steel shields. This chapter wasn't too difficult. I had to be a bit careful, but as long as I took it slow, there weren't many problems. This chapter let us get Byleth to level 10, and we also got Dedu to level 8. Now we can move on to chapter 3. And on our first free day, we went to the greenhouse and didn't get the stat booster I wanted. But on the second week, we got a Rocky Burdock, which is the stat booster I wanted, that grants +1 strength permanently. Every single free time we have of this game, I will be trying to get this stat booster, so by the end of the game, we should have around 47 of these, since I am designating the final week of each month for auxiliary battles. This also means we only need 30 strength for Byleth, until we could potentially max out her strength with Rocky Burdocks. Anyways, the rest of this month is going to be very similar to the rest of the game. Gardening, feeding students to raise motivation, and grinding faculty training, which we unlocked this month. On the last week, I did some battles, as I said I would do. and we were able to get Dedue to level 10, which allowed us to not only reclass him into a brawler, but also allow him to be our second attacker of this challenge. Dedue really showed his strength in this chapter too. Since his defense stat is normally pretty high, we can pretty much use him to rush into battle without worrying about his health for now. I also used some of my weaker units as attack bait so we could spam heals and gain XP. Our only problem here was fighting the mage hiding in the fog. Enemies like this one use magic, and since our main attackers don't really have the greatest growth rates for resisting magic, we might run into some problems later on with enemies like these, especially since they can already shred through Dedue's health unlike any other enemy. We were thankfully able to take him out, and with that brought a cutscene showing Catherine using her Thunderbrand. This calls for punishment, and since she likes fighting, we're going to recruit her later and never let her fight again. The boss for this chapter, Lord Lanato, wasn't too difficult to defeat. I was actually able to use him to grind some XP for Mercedes before he had to meet his end in a total of 45 turns. For chapter 4, we were tasked to protect the Holy Mausoleum. I prepared for this by planting seeds, bringing all my units' support levels to C, and of course grinding in auxiliary battles. This brought Dimitri to level 11, which means we now have a third unit to use for attacking in this challenge. And since this chapter shows the first time we meet up with the Death Knight, I thought that maybe I should try to throw hands with him. So on turn 1, I made Dedue rush into battle, and he just barely has enough health to survive an attack from the Death Knight. So I didn't really need to play that carefully. I was even able to move Dimitri closer to the battle since the Death Knight was dead set on hitting Dedue. On enemy phase, Dedue survived on 1 HP, and on the next turn, I used Byleth to take out most of the Death Knight's HP and finished him off with Dimitri. Every other enemy in this chapter seemed to be defeated with no problem, including the enemy commander. This allowed us to discover the Sword of the Creator, and according to my rules, I am not allowed to disclose what took place in this cutscene. Now we can go ahead and start chapter 5, where we're tasked with taking down some bandits who stole an ancient relic in the shape of a lance that we will need to steal and then never use. For our monthly grinding, I was able to level up Sylvain and Felix to 10, which brings us to 5 attackers, but when I went into the main battle of this chapter, I found some problems very quickly because I accidentally aggroed the archers. We would keep taking a ton of damage without being able to heal or deal that much damage back. We were able to take out the boss Miklon, which teleports us far away from most of the enemies, but only Dedue and Mercedes survived, and Dedue just isn't strong enough to take out the demonic beast before he's tracked down by the enemy. But I had a plan. Did that plan include not aggroing the archers? No, of course not. That would not be as funny. Instead, I rolled back time from turn 24 to turn 8, and I hid our entire army in this choke point so only a few enemies could attack us at a time. I also used Mercedes to give Byleth and Dedue Bluetooth fists so they could attack the archers, all while Miklon slowly made his way into a spot in front of Byleth just to miss his attack. This allowed us to rally Byleth using a net and defeat Miklon's first phase, and since his beast form is permanently stuck in this circular area, we can defeat the rest of the enemies for some XP, and then when it came to Miklon, we hit our very first critical hit in the entire challenge and finished the chapter in 45 turns. Chapter 6's Underground Chamber was another map that included the Death Knight and a 25 turn limit. I wanted to get this chapter done quickly, but for some reason Dimitri isn't allowed to battle on this map. So for his replacement, we have Marianne, who can't attack, but healing is still a very valuable tool to have. Also, I needed to start gaining XP for her since she was just recruited during this free time of this chapter, as well as Cyril, who started to learn brawling. I started this map by trying to push as fast as possible. This worked out pretty well, but near the end, I realized I needed to backtrack because of a chest holding a movement ring that we will need for the remainder of the game. So I held back on fighting the Death Knight so Felix and Dedue can grab the ring using some warp tiles located on this map. After that, I had all my able-bodied units start attacking, and we beat the chapter with 1 turn to spare. Now for Chapter 7, the Battle of the Eagle and Lion. For this chapter, I wanted to recruit some of the students in other classes so we could have more attackers. I specifically picked Caspar and Raphael since I believed they would be the best fit for my team, and I could also give them Unarmed Combat the second they join my class. Anyways, the Battle of the Eagle and Lion. It's a huge Mach battle between all 3 of the houses, and it's supposed to be pretty difficult, but it's just not. The only students on our team that were defeated were Caspar and Raphael, who aren't that strong yet, so it was a little bit expected. But after winning, we got 1,500 gold coins in the form of a weapon. Chapter 8, The Flame in the Darkness. For this chapter, I recruited Manuela and then began the Sothis Paralog so I can gain a Knowledge Gem and some more Divine Pulses. There is a problem with some of these paralogs though. Mission maps typically have a recommended level that doesn't change, but paralogs scale closer to your level, which can make things a lot more difficult. For this specific map, we have to defeat one enemy monster that is being guarded by 3 other enemy monsters. To get past this, I used my first turn to defeat a giant wolf on a nearby bridge, and attempted to fly over to the group with Byleth since she was separated. I also sent Annette to the left side of the map to open a chest with the Knowledge Gem. On turn 2, I defeated the monster with Felix, and started to move down with the rest of my units to aggro the enemies at the bottom of the map. On turn 3, I started moving in closer to the boss while attacking a giant hawk too. These monster enemies always have these shields that protect them from taking a bunch of damage. So I tried making it a priority to break these shields so I could not only deal more damage but also stun the enemy for 1 turn. This strategy unfortunately led to Caspar taking a bit too much damage, but it also let me sneak behind the boss and attack from 3 different spaces. This gave us a pretty easy way to finish this chapter in 7 turns. Now that we have that paralog complete, we are able to use the Knowledge Gem that Annette stole to gain 2 times the amount of weapon proficiency as you normally would. And since we are only allowed to deal damage with Unarmed Combat, we can't really use this, or at least that's what it would seem like. Every map that we've played so far, besides the prologue, had these yellow and purple glowing spaces. And when you step on these spaces, you get a little gift. The yellow ones give you XP, and the purple ones give you a random weapon. Usually you'll get a rusted weapon, and these have terrible accuracy. So if an enemy is hiding in a bush, you'll have a 0% chance of being able to hit them, and you'll gain weapon proficiency for every attempted hit. So if we're surrounded by enemies, we'll gain around 8 experience each turn without the Knowledge Gem, and 16 with the Knowledge Gem. So by missing until we reach the turn limit of 99, we can easily make our way to A rank or higher on any weapon type. This is a strategy I'm going to use so all my male units can reclass into War Masters once they hit level 30. This will give us the skill Crit plus 20, which is going to be essential to our final builds for the game, where I'm going to be relying on crit chance. During this chapter, I also attempted Manuela and Hanneman's paralog to get the Experience Gem, which is the Knowledge Gem but for unit experience rather than weapon experience. I also tried Felix's paralog, and unfortunately I wasn't able to do any of those, so I will try them later once I'm a high enough level. But for Chapter 8's mission, we have to go to Remer Village and save some villagers from zombified villagers, which give us the most beautiful voice line in the entire game. Anyways, we have a few green units on our side to attack, as well as some other green units we need to keep alive to get a large bullion. This chapter was a lot easier than I expected. I split up my team in 2, having both sides save villagers and attack. After moving close enough to the bottom half of the map with Dimitri, the Death Knight will spawn in, and with a bit of luck we can one-shot him and bait out the boss Solon to finish the map in 10 turns. Now we're on to Chapter 9, The Cause of Sorrow. This is a very important chapter, and it shapes the way we play the rest of the game. This is because Lady Rhea asks us to participate in the White Heron Cup, and the results of this cup will allow us to make one unit a dancer. I chose Marianne to be our dancer for this run, and since I decided to take out all my competition in this chapter, that being Hilda, we easily got our dancer and can now basically infinitely grind for experience by pressing a few buttons in auxiliary battles. I'll talk more about this later, but for now we need to talk about Chapter 9's mission. We're tasked with helping some units who are being attacked by demonic beasts. We're not the only ones attacking though. Geralt is also attacking, and we aren't allowed to let him die, as if that really matters. Anyways, I split up my team once again and easily got through the chapter. It was really easy. Unfortunately, Geralt wasn't allowed to come out of this chapter alive. He attacked one of the enemies with an axe, and the enemy thought a rightful punishment was death. Byleth couldn't even save him because of the distance that would have required a sword to be used. I guess her Bluetooth fists ran out of battery. That will not happen again. Chapter 10, Where the Goddess Dwells. For this chapter, I did the normal routine. I also returned to Felix's paralogue, which was definitely impossible the first time I tried. But since I have much better stats, I got through in one turn. I also returned to Manuela and Hanneman's paralogue, and we were forced to use Manuela and Hanneman, who don't have nearly enough health to survive even a single attack. So my strategy here was to sort of block the entrances for enemies to get closer to Hanneman on the left side, and I used Byleth to fly on the right side and protect Manuela. The way the enemies had their formation was not promising though. Manuela had no free areas to go to and was put in a checkmate. Thankfully, the win condition of this map is to defeat the boss, which had some enemies protecting him, but they all went downward to attack Dimitri and Felix, making this paralogue last 6 turns. I also tested out Lady Rhea's paralogue, and I'm convinced this is impossible with the few attackers I have. I wanted to get the boots from this chapter so one of my units could have better move, but we are forced to use Ashe and Rhea, who will automatically fail the chapter for us the second they get into any sort of combat. At the very least, right after I saw that, Byleth was now level 30, which allowed me to move her into the Falcon Knight class. And this is great because we're slowly building up Byleth to be able to dodge most attacks. I also was able to move Cyril into the War Master class, which he will likely stay in for the rest of the game because of how powerful it is. But now we're on to this month's mission. Dimitri got word of our enemy's location, and it's our job to ruin their day. Most of the enemies are pretty easy to take care of. They're fairly normal. But the boss of this chapter, Kranya, is not normal. She has incredible stats. 42 speed at the halfway point of the game is wild. Byleth doesn't even compare to her despite being at a higher level. I can only really hope to get lucky enough here to actually land my attacks, and thankfully Cyril lands really low percent hits and allows Byleth to steal the kill. This ends the first half of the chapter, where the Solon guy hollow purples Byleth into the void for eternity. But since Byleth is such a hater, she uses her bare hands to rip back into reality just to punch Solon a few times and finish the map in 11 turns. Also, Byleth now has brighter hair because she fused with this Sothis girl, who's probably not that important. This is also not the last time this exact thing will happen in a strategy game featured on this channel. If you know, you know, just wait a little while. Chapter 11. I'm going to say it right now. This is the final chapter for a little while that's actually easy. Lady Rhea brings us to the Holy Mausoleum, where she keeps a bunch of crest stones. And of course, we get attacked here, so we have to fight a bunch of enemies. But I had a genius plan going into this that allowed me to cheese this chapter. Dimitri is the only unit in the game who is able to have both Battalion Vantage and Battalion Wrath, which means if any battalion Dimitri has equipped is 1/3 or lower the max amount of durability, he will always strike first, and have plus 50% crit rate. So if we bestow upon him the mythic Bluetooth fists, we can just watch as he destroys an entire army standing completely still. All this power causes him to go insane. And for some reason, he pulls out a lance and starts to attack some enemies. Dimitri is supposed to only use his fists. This is wrong, and now he really wants to kill Edelgard, and he's hoping he can get it done in Chapter 12 to War. This chapter, or rather the transition from this chapter to the next one, is known to be the hardest part of the entire game, and I'll explain why once we experience it. Anyways, Chapter 12's mission has the Imperial Army invade Garreg Mach. There is a ton of enemies here, and we can't allow any of them to reach the top of the map before we defeat Edelgard. This is the easy part. Edelgard isn't very fast, but she's really strong. So after defeating her in 9 turns, she sends out the reserve troops and starts a war. Byleth was asked to not fight in this war, but she does anyway, and since she's so insistent on using a sword, she gets blasted into a pit for 5 whole years. Now, I'm not sure how she survived, but the first thing she does outside of the pit is to go find Dimitri, and he's been going through some things these past 5 years, and ultimately lost the plot. So Byleth reaches out her hand to signify that things are not over, and we can still punch our way to victory. And that brings us to Chapter 13's Reunion at Dawn. No free time, no preparation, we get put into battle immediately after completing the previous chapter. We don't even get to use any of our units we've had in the previous chapters. It is just Byleth and Dimitri, and honestly, that's probably for the best since these are my strongest units. Unfortunately, Dimitri has changed a lot within these 5 years. He is now a High Lord instead of a Warrior, which isn't that bad, but we do miss out on plus 20 crit. In this chapter, most of the enemies outspeed us, so I was worried about if we could even survive with our good units. My strategy here was to hide in some bushes and try to attack enemies while we had better avoid rate. This was a simple way to control the crowd in this map, and it was sort of a way to force the enemies to attack at this specific area. But, of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. After the first turn, Gilbert spawns in with Ash at the top of the map, while Mercedes spawns in with Annette at the bottom. This kinda sucks. None of them can attack, and even though they're so far away from our main attackers, the enemies can just walk up to them without any issue. Thankfully, even though Mercedes can't defend herself, she is able to keep her health in check by healing either Byleth or Dimitri. This allowed us to break free of the enemies, defeat the archer who hated Mercedes for some reason, and start actually moving on to the right side of the map. This allowed Felix and Sylvain to spawn into the map, and they both immediately fell, so it was just Dimitri, Byleth, and Mercedes again. And we aren't able to survive all of these attacks, so we had to once again hide in the bushes and keep Mercedes far away from the battles so she could actually survive. This almost didn't work, but we were able to remove all the enemies besides the boss Pilardo, and he's not that difficult to get past if we get lucky. Now we can move on to chapter 14, the Delusional Prince. And the very first thing I did for this chapter for my free time was move Annette into the assassin class since she finally got the correct weapon proficiencies. This brings us to the mission of this chapter, which requires us to protect Garreg Mach. And this chapter sucks. We lose if an enemy stands on specific tiles, and we win if we defeat every single enemy in the map. And this map has infinite reinforcements. I tried to optimally get through this chapter by defeating as many enemies as I possibly could defeat on turn 1, and while I was able to do that pretty well, some of the enemies will completely ignore battling and go straight for the objective. We aren't even able to protect those spaces since we need to protect an NPC from getting killed so we can stop the reinforcements. And since Byleth isn't strong enough, we aren't actually able to help the NPC that much. But if getting strong is all we need, I may have a solution to this. At this moment, all of our free time farming has brought us to 23 Rocky Burdock items, which gives us +1 strength permanently. Byleth currently has 38 strength at this moment, but by using 13 of my 23 Rocky Burdocks, we can now bring her up to 51, where she can destroy all of the enemies in her way and protect the NPC. This allows us to set fire to the ground, damaging most of the enemy units as well as stopping them from moving. And since an NPC did it, this doesn't go against the rules of the challenge, even though this is clearly a battalion attack. So in 12 turns, we were able to finish this chapter, and this made me feel like I was way too underleveled. I didn't want to struggle, but what other choice did I have? Well, I actually do have a choice. We don't really need to farm Rocky Burdocks anymore. We could just play auxiliary battles. Now that we have Marianne, stat boosts might not be a problem. Adjutants in this game get 50% of the experience gain the unit they're with receives, but with the experience gem and skills like Royal Lineage Plus, we should get around 90% experience instead if the way I'm thinking this works is correct. Big block attacks jump scare, this is how I believe it works. Pause the video if you want. I just want to get back to the gameplay where I can say that dancers lose the ability to gain XP after using dance 10 times, but can also regain that ability if you go into auto battle. I found this on the Triangle Attack website. The link should be in the description because I got like half the information for this video from that website, so yeah, check it out. Anyways, this made chapter 15 really easy. We only had to defeat one boss and that was it, done deal. Chapter 16 was a bit different though. There were a lot of bosses, and Dedu also spawns in to join us in the fight. My strategy here was to give Dimitri the Bluetooth fists and put him in the front line so he can do what he does best, which is hitting crits. Seriously, we built Dimitri up so good that he has 100% crit rate, and this allows us to beat this chapter without any problems. We went from things being quite dire to now being able to power through a chapter without needing to think all that much. Chapter 17, Blood of the Eagle and Lion. This chapter is sort of a part 2 to the Battle of the Eagle and Lion. It's a battle between the three houses at Gronder Field. During my auxiliary battles, something sort of worrying came up. Marianne was slowly getting closer and closer to level 99, and I wasn't so sure if we'd still gain XP if she wasn't able to gain any XP. Thankfully, it didn't really matter. We still got the same amount of XP, regardless if she could even get any at all. For the mission of this chapter, there weren't really any issues. We just had to travel across the map to punch Edelgard a single time. And after this chapter, I now felt like I was over-leveled. I spent the time to make good units, and now they're too good. So I decided to do a victory lap of sorts, and tried to see just how fast I could do the rest of the chapters in this game. For Chapter 18's The King's Triumphant Return, the boss is located 18 spaces away, and Byleth only has 8 move. But if I give her the March Ring, that gets boosted to 9, and with Annette's Rally, it goes up to 10. But we're still 8 spaces short. So I used Manuela to warp Marianne closer to Byleth, so when she moves, we can have her move a second time, and finish the chapter in only 1 turn. For Chapter 19, the Golden DeersPlea, we're tasked with saving Claude, and getting rid of a boss. This time, the boss is a lot further away than the previous chapter, so on turn 1, I cleared a path for Byleth to move through, so on turn 2, we can move all the way to the boss and punch him to finish the chapter. For Chapter 20, the Impregnable Fortress, we do the exact same thing. We fly over to the Death Knight and throw hands. It's that easy. But unfortunately for us, the next chapter, it's not so easy. Chapter 21's Our Chosen Paths is a map where there's a ton of enemies and 2 different areas to deploy our units. We can't cheese this chapter as hard as we did the other ones. The boss of this chapter, Hubert, is 38 spaces away, and if you end a turn on any of these 119 spaces, Hubert will get completely blocked off by 4 strong units. So my plan here wasn't to just go in a straight line and attack. I tried that and it did not work. So instead, we're going to go around Hubert where this water is, get rid of any enemies that might cause issues, and then fly to him to finish the chapter in 11 turns. Finishing this chapter brings us to Chapter 22, Oath of the Dagger. This is the final chapter of this challenge, and we have 1 enemy to defeat, Edelgard. And this time, she has turned herself into one of the demonic beasts we've been fighting. She also has a weapon with 32 spaces of range, and she has a total of 570 health across 4 different health bars. So to get prepared for this chapter, I used up all the stat boosters I had left, so this is our final stats for Byleth, and this is our final stats for Dimitri. Turn 1. For my first turn, I moved Ash to the front of the group and made him use Stride. After that, I used Mercedes to give my units Bluetooth fists, and moved her toward a room with enemies in front of us. After that, I moved Dimitri toward a bunch of enemies. I moved the rest of my units in appropriate spaces close to the battle, but not so close that I could get attacked. So on enemy phase, every enemy within Dimitri's range would try to attack, but they can't. Battalion Vantage allows us to attack first every single time, and since Dimitri has a 100% crit rate, he is always going to deal around 180 damage, which is more than enough to defeat every single one of those enemies. Just look at these Bluetooth fists, it's wild. On turn 2, I started to bring my units closer to Edelgard, mainly Dimitri though. The enemy phase was really eventful too. We get to see Bluetooth fists in action, probably the furthest we've ever seen them work. We're witnessing Space Jam Michael Jordan in a Fire Emblem game. This should not be possible. We're so far away, the camera can't even have both units in the same frame. But for turn 3, we finally reach Edelgard, and we aren't actually able to hit crits on her, because she has the armored shield all the beast type enemies have. So we're probably going to want to remove that shield if we want to survive. Since Edelgard is able to deal quite a bit of damage, on turn 4 I started to bring Byleth upward so she can help out Dimitri. On turn 6, Byleth does reach Dimitri, but she isn't able to attack Edelgard until turn 7, which is where we deal a bunch of damage to Edelgard and bring her to her final health bar, as well as breaking her shield, finally allowing critical hits. So after I moved my units to their correct spots, I ended the turn. His hit rate is the same as Felix's health. That's great. Okay, they can't get a hit off him for whatever reason. Oh, someone's going... No way! He hit the crit! She hit the crit! No. No way. Okay. Wow. Edelgard, she hit a crit. Oh, she's gonna attack again. She can't hit a crit. Okay, Byleth, you got this. Oof. Oof. 162 damage with her fists. And with that, we have officially completed Fire Emblem Three Houses while only using our fists, except for Claude using his bow in the prologue. I thought this was an interesting challenge, and I hope you did too. This challenge was also a lot easier than I thought it would be. I knew what I wanted my units to be before I even started the challenge, and being able to have that plan in motion was just wonderful to see. You're never going to find Bluetooth fists anywhere else. But if I were to do a challenge like this again, I'd probably do rusted weapons only, but I think I'd find an easy way to get through that too. So let's say if this video gets enough likes, I will attempt to beat Fire Emblem Three Houses with 0 move. I think 776 likes would be a fair amount, don't you think? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to check out some of my other videos while you're here. But yeah, that's all I got.